September 1961. As Betty and Barney Hill were heading home from vacation in Montreal, Canada, they noticed a star in the sky growing bigger and brighter, seemingly keeping pace with their vehicle. They realize it's not a star, but a flat, pancake-shaped object with flashing colored lights. In today's episode, we'll look at one of the first reported UFO encounters, detailing their abduction experience, their hypnotherapy sessions, and the aftermath of their abduction. Welcome to today's episode of the Cabinet of Dr. Mystery. I am your host, Dr. Mystery.
Did you know I'm utterly insane?
Reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
What an excellent day for an exorcism.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
I am the devil, and I am here to do the devil's work.
Whatever you do, don't fall asleep.
This creature, this leader is telling me something.
He's telling you something. How? How is he getting it to you?
I can see it in his face.
Do you see his lips move? Yes?
No, his lips aren't moving.
Yes, go on. He's telling you.
And he's looking at me.
What did he tell you?
Stay there and keep looking. Just keep looking and stay there. And just keep looking. Just keep looking.
Could you hear him tell you?
Oh, I gotta pull these binoculars away from my eyes. Because if I don't, I'll just keep staying there.
Could you hear him tell you this?
Oh, no, he didn't say it.
You felt he said it.
I know.
You know he said it.
Just there, yeah. Just stay there, he's saying to me. It's
all right.
pounding in my head. Just
all
don't
right.
pull the binoculars away. God, give me strength.
All right.
Pull them down. Run! Pull these binoculars down and run. God, if there's a God, give me strength. I gotta get away. Oh, Betty.
All right.
We gotta get away, Betty.
All right. Calm down.
I'm driving. I gotta
down.
get away.
What you just heard was an audio recording from hypnotic regression therapy performed on supposed UFO abductee Barney Hill. In that clip that we just showed you, Barney's talking about how he needs to remove the binoculars from his face and run back to the car. Barney is standing, looking at this object through binoculars, and he's realizing that they are going to capture them. Most people who are interested in UFOs and alien abduction stories already know about Betty and Barney Hill. They're one of the first known incidents of reported modern alien abductions. We used a few different sources for this episode, including the documentary by Kathleen Marden and Stanton T. Friedman, as well as their book, Captured, The Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Another one of our main sources is The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller. Now, I do want to say that Stanton T. Friedman is a nuclear physicist, so maybe that adds a little bit of credibility to his works at least. Betty and Barney Hill lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Betty was a social worker with a degree from the University of New Hampshire, and Barney was a postal worker. They also had a cute little dog, a dachshund, named Delcy. In September 1961, they claimed to have been abducted by aliens in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The couple were returning home to Portsmouth from a trip to Montreal, Canada. As they were driving in the middle of the night, they saw lights approaching from the sky. What followed is said to be the first well-documented, feasibly legitimate UFO abduction in history. In addition to UFO, an unidentified flying object, the couple claimed that they saw bipedal humanoid creatures in the window of a large spacecraft that landed in a field. So Betty passed away in 2004, but for the remainder of her life after this incident, she continued her research into UFOs. Unfortunately, a few years after this abduction story, Barney passed away in 1969. So before we dive into the details of their hypnosis and their accounts of being abducted, we need to think about why these two would claim that they were abductees. What would Betty, who has a master's degree in a social work program and she's a supervisor in the New Hampshire welfare department. Barney is also a governor of the New Hampshire Civil Rights Commission, right? And they're both members of the NAACP. They're both in a Unitarian church. Barney sat on a local board of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. They're active civil servants. So what would they have to gain by a hoax? Right? What would they have to gain by making all of this up? Because a lot of people who come up with hoaxes, or a lot of people who even remain adamant that their abductions were real, even if abductees remain diligent and steadfast in claiming that their abduction was real, several people who have been abducted or have claims of abduction, even if they're not hoaxes, even if they're not proved a hoax, they lose their jobs or they are excommunicated from the churches. So, in society, if people claim that they're UFO abductees, being associated with abductees is not really something a lot of people want to do. They usually try to distance themselves or publicly distance themselves from abductees. So what would these people, this interracial couple from this, back in the 60s, what would they have to gain from a hoax or making false claims of their abduction? I think since we're talking about space and aliens again, I think since we're on another episode about Men in Black and aliens and UFOs, I think it's only fair that I take another trip into deep space with this amazing, wonderful, not sponsored, I just really enjoy them, this deep space THC infused beverage. So let's dive into their abduction here. September 1961. The couple are heading home from a vacation in Montreal, Canada. As they're traveling down Highway 3 just outside of Colebrook, New Hampshire, Betty first noticed a star that appeared to be moving. Soon they realized the star was moving and keeping pace with them. So Barney is an avid plane watcher, a World War II vet, and, he's not an idiot. He seems like a fairly intelligent guy. So he's sure that they have nothing to worry about. It's just a satellite or some satellite that went off course, probably. After listening to the tapes and reading about this abduction, I personally believe that Barney was trying to convince himself that it was just a satellite or just a plane or something that had gone off course. I think that Barney was actually really worried because he knew that it wasn't that, and I think he was just trying to convince himself. Betty was quoted as saying, "If you think that's a satellite or a star, you're being completely ridiculous." From Betty's recollection, the lights from the UFO were a bright orange, almost red beam with a flashing blue light similar to a light on a police cruiser. Eventually, they decided to stop the car and use binoculars to attempt to see what the object was. Barney left the road and moved through the woods to get a closer look. By this time, the Hills realized that the star was a pancake-shaped object which had moved to a position in front of their car at treetop level. As Barney got closer, he observed two fin-like objects with blinking red lights that appeared to detach from the fins as the fins began coming out of the sides of the object. Barney could see bipedal humanoids, standing in a large window looking out at him. As he observed, all of the men except what Barney called the leader turned and began operating levers and controls on the wall behind them. Meanwhile, the leader continued staring at Barney, and Barney could detect that the leader was telling him not to be afraid and that they were going to come down for him and bring him on board. And it's important to note that Barney didn't hear anybody speak to him. He felt it. It's important to note that Barney didn't hear anything. He felt it, that they were communicating with him telepathically. So as you can hear in that clip that we just played for you, Barney was filled with absolute terror and found that he could not take the binoculars away from his face. He claimed that the leader's eyes bored into his head. He tore the binoculars away from his eyes so hard that he broke the strap around his neck, and then ran hysterically back to the car screaming to Betty, "They are going to capture us." He jumped in the car and began driving erratically. Betty said that she was more curious than afraid at the time, stating, "I understood something was going to happen, and I didn't know what it was, but I was ready for it. At that point, I rolled down the window and waved hello to the aircraft. At this time, I was sure it was a flying saucer, but I didn't say anything." Suddenly, a group of beings was blocking their way. Barney stopped the car, but he couldn't restart it. As the men came towards them, in their car, the couple began hearing beeping sounds. This is when their memory failed them. When they returned to consciousness, they heard another series of beeps. So for almost 3 years, their memories would stop at that scene, only to pick up sometime later that night when they found themselves driving south near Ashland. So the couple suspected that the first time they heard the series of beeps, it was like a trigger that put them into a trance and led them onto the aircraft. And the second time that they heard it, it was the same idea as a hypnotist snapping his fingers or clapping his hands to break you out of a trance. When they finally got home to Portsmouth, they felt dirty, their watches had stopped working, Barney's shoes were strangely scuffed, and Betty's dress was strangely ripped. And there was also 2 hours of missing time. So after a few months, Barney began developing anxiety, ulcers, and enormously painful genital warts. Barney recalls being experimented on, including a semen sample being taken and anal probing. We're going to play another little clip from Barney's hypnosis here.
The eyes are there. Always the eyes are there. And they're telling me I don't have to be afraid. Is there an accident down the road? What's the red? The bright red.
Bright red?
Yeah.
What is that?
Orange and red.
Where is that?
Right down the road.
Down the road.
I don't have to be afraid. But they won't talk to me.
Who won't talk to you?
The men.
In the vehicle?
No, they are standing in the road.
And where are you? You're in the car?
No. I'm just suspended. I'm just floating about. Oh, how funny. Float about. Is it floating? Nothing. I want to get back to the car, but just floating about.
You really floating about, or is that the way you feel?
The way I feel.
You're still outside of the car?
No.
You're in the car.
I'm not in the car. I'm not near the car. I'm not in the woods. I'm not on the road.
Well, where are these men?
I don't know.
On the road.
I don't know.
I'm just floating about. Oh, geez. That's the funniest thing, Betty. Funniest thing. I never believed in flying saucers, but I don't know. Mighty mysterious. Yeah. Well, I guess I won't say anything to anybody about this. It's too ridiculous, isn't it? Oh, yeah, it's really funny. Wonder where they came from. Oh, geez, I wish I had gone with them.
You wish you had gone with them?
Yes. Oh, what a experience to go to some distant planet. Maybe this will prove the existence of God.
So in that clip that we just showed you, we hear Barney talk about the alien's eyes and how they bore into his head. He also mentions how these creatures were communicating without speaking, telling him not to be afraid. So I personally think that there's some sort of connection between those terrifying red glowing eyes that he mentioned and being able to communicate telepathically. He also mentions that he doesn't believe in aliens or UFOs. So he says, isn't this funny? Right? I don't believe in this. Isn't this funny that it's happening to me and I have no belief in it? He says that he would love to go with them to a distant planet. And finally he says, maybe this will prove the existence of God. So I think that even just Barney's hypnosis proves that he really fully doesn't even believe in aliens and UFOs, and the fact that he has this experience is what's giving him anxiety and making him uncomfortable and giving him these awful ulcers and other medical conditions that caused his death. Ultimately, I personally believe that this experience, whether it was Betty's dreams embedded in his mind, whether it was an actual abduction, whether it was military or government abduction and there were false memories implanted, whatever the case may be, this abduction case is, I think, what killed Barney Hill. We'll discuss hypnotherapy and the hypnosis sessions in further detail a little bit later on in this episode, but for now I want to focus on what these sessions covered. So these hypnotic sessions, these hypnotic regression therapy sessions were conducted by Dr. Benjamin Simon. So I'll talk a little bit more about him later on when we speak about hypnotic regression near the end of this episode. But for now, I want to focus on what the sessions actually recovered. So Betty's hypnosis recovered some of the following memories. She said they were taken into separate rooms for testing. One of the aliens spoke English, which was their leader, or as she calls him, the leader. The examiner and 9 others were present. The examination consisted of examining and assessing their eyes, ears, nose, and throat. They also took samples of their hair, fingernails, and their skin. Betty said she was hooked up to wires, which the leader had said was to check her nervous system. Afterwards, they inserted a large needle into Betty's navel, which they said was done for a pregnancy test. Betty said this was extremely painful. When Betty said that, I don't want this test done, she said it's going to be extremely painful. The leader said, he assured her, it's not going to be painful, I promise you, it'll be really quick. And then when he noticed that it was actually excruciatingly painful for Betty, he placed his hand on her forehead and eased her pain that way. So as an interesting side note, in the 1960s, no such pregnancy test existed. Right? There was no practical tests that were being conducted for pregnancy with a needle being inserted in your navel. However, in the 1970s, let's see if I can pronounce this correctly, amniocentesis and laparoscopy became widely used in providing information about pregnancies. So this begs the question, if these two techniques didn't exist, how did Betty know about these? How would Betty make up a medical procedure that wouldn't be in use for another, 10 years? So here's a little clip from Betty's hypnotic regression therapy.
And the examiner has a long needle in his hand. And I see the needle. And it's bigger than any needle I've ever seen. And I asked him what he's going to do with it. And he said just a simple test of therapy. And I asked him what. And he said he just wants to put it in my navel. And it's just a simple test. And I don't know, it will hurt. Don't do it. Don't do it. And even though it won't hurt. And he sticks a needle into my navel. And and I'm crying and I tell him it's hurting, take it out. And then the leader, he goes over and he puts his hand, runs his hand in front of my eyes. And he says, I'll be all right. I won't feel it. And all the pain goes away. He did something. He opened up, it wasn't like a drawer. He sort of did something in the metal of the wall. There was an opening. And he pulled down a map. And he asked me, had I ever seen a map like this before? And I walked across the room, and I leaned against the table, and I looked at it. And it was a map of, it was an oblong map. And he said that the heavy lines were trade routes. And then the other lines, the solid lines were places they went occasionally. And he said that the broken lines were expeditions. So I asked him where was his home port? And he said, where are you on this map? And I looked and I laughed and I said, I don't know. So he said, well then, if you don't know where you are, there wouldn't be any point of my telling you where I am. And he put the map, the map rolled up and he put it back in the space in the wall and closed it. And I felt very stupid because I didn't know where the Earth was on the map.
So there you can hear in detail Betty Hill's experience and what she remembers from being under hypnosis. It's a pretty detailed, pretty vivid, pretty graphic description and depiction of the incident that occurred. So I thought it was important for you to hear that whole thing. Obviously that's not the whole tape, but that's a significant chunk of her hypnosis sessions. After being experimented on, Betty remembers watching the UFO ascend from their vehicle. She saw it become surrounded by a, quote, fiery revolving mass and then speed away. There was a radar report from a nearby airport, and it recorded an unidentified aircraft at 2:14 a.m. around the time of the abduction. Some argue that what we're about to talk about is the most concrete proof in regards to this abduction. Personally, I think this lends a little bit of credibility to this situation. Under hypnosis, Betty recalled a map shown to her by the alien beings. In these hypnosis sessions, she drew a pattern of dots, lines, and circles that she said was a star map shown to her by the UFO commander, or the leader, as she called him. When this map was initially shown to astronomers, they stated that it didn't match any known constellations. However, several years later, it was resubmitted after newer technologies came out. An astronomer in Ohio produced a view of nearby stars that seemed to match Betty's drawing. Surprisingly, the map's viewpoint was from deep in space, looking back at our solar system. Most of the identified stars on the map were similar in size and brightness to our own sun, although such stars are a distinct minority in the galaxy. So these stars are the only kind of stars likely to have planets with intelligent life orbiting them. The map supposedly showed the sky as seen from a planet orbiting the star system Zeta Reticuli, from which the alien abductors had supposedly arrived. From Betty's star map, astronomers have deducted these visitors could come from Zeta 1 and 2 Reticuli. These two stars are incredibly close together and are suitable for plant and animal life. Astronomers theorize that if space travel were to happen anywhere, it would be between these two stars. It's also important to note that these two stars are 1 billion years older than Earth. So now this brings us to the question of hypnotic regression. Dr. Benjamin Simon is a doctor who put the couple under hypnosis. He also stated that he believed Betty to be simply having dreams about these alien abductions, and Barney's memories that trigger his anxiety and his illnesses that were just simply implanted by Betty's dreams, and Betty reciting these dreams to Barney or sharing these dreams with Barney, and Barney took these on as his own. Dr. Simon's goal was to disprove the alien abduction theory. So, through hypnotic regression, a cooperative witness can recall details about an event that they may have forgotten, or they may never have noticed it consciously. I do, however, remain a little bit skeptical about hypnotic regression. So if a subject is in a highly suggestible state, the subject may concoct fictitious details or imaginary ideas to please their own subconscious, or the subconsciously sensed desires of the interrogator. If your subject is highly suggestible, then you can almost implant these memories without intentionally implanting them. You could lead the person into these situations through your questioning if it's not worded correctly. Some researchers in California have hypnotized subjects with no previous UFO experiences or interests and asked them leading questions about a non-existent UFO abduction that the subjects were led to assume that they had undergone, and they have responded with a wealth of details conjured up from their imaginations. The stories sounded no different from many classic abduction cases, including Betty and Barney Hill's. Dr. Simon is still convinced that the entire UFO abduction story was this kind of phenomenon, an innocent fabrication based on subconscious anxieties and vivid imaginations. In addition to the star map that was drawn, Betty and Barney both in and out of hypnosis, drew pictures that resembled their alien abductors. I'll post on the socials a few of the sketches that Betty and Barney had drawn. They drew a few sketches of the UFO aircraft that they saw. They drew a few sketches of their alien abductors. But it's important to note that along with the suggestibility from hypnotic regression, there's also the suggestibility or subconscious implanting of memories from things that you may have seen on television or in a video game. And I think in this case, someone had raised the suggestion that Barney, since he had watched an episode of The Outer Limits which featured an alien that looked similar to the sketches that he had drawn, maybe he was subconsciously conjuring up these ideas to fill in the blanks of missing time or things that he couldn't remember from his abduction experience. So when you look at the drawing of, the sketch of what he drew based on his memory or recollection of the alien abductors, you can see that it's a lot similar, or it is very similar to the aliens that were featured on the episode of Outer Limits that he had seen. So with this episode, when we discuss aliens, my idea isn't to discredit anybody, but my goal isn't to prove these alien experiences either. Ultimately, my goal is to share the most relevant, crucial information I can with you so you can make a conclusion for yourselves. That being said, another theory that I'd like to look at is that Betty and Barney may have accidentally ingested a hallucinogenic substance such as DMT. That was a real theory that I came across in my research, is that people that have proclaimed that they are alien abductees may have experienced some kind of hallucinogenic episode where they didn't know that they were on psychedelics. DMT, or N-dimethyltryptamine, is a hallucinogenic tryptamine drug. DMT produces effects similar to those of psychedelics like LSD and magic mushrooms. DMT is also known as the spirit molecule. So I'll be honest, I am no stranger to psychedelics. I love hallucinogenic drugs. I think it's wonderful to put yourself in a situation where you are experiencing things beyond, the physical realm, beyond what you can touch and see and smell and feel and hear, right? It is, when you take psychedelics, in my personal experience with psychedelics, you are entering just a different dimension. You're entering a different realm. The world is a completely different place, and I really personally enjoy psychedelic drugs. I think that obviously they have their place, their time and place, but I think that they're very beneficial for mental health reasons, and I think that it's also very important to have a lot of fun in life. And so, I think if you do your hallucinogenics in a safe way, you have a babysitter or a sitter, you have, you're doing them safely, and you have a comfortable environment, I think you can have a wonderful experience on psychedelics. But this isn't the Tyler Drug Hour. That's a different podcast. So let's jump back into DMT here for a sec. Some experts believe the pineal gland produces DMT in the brain and releases it when we dream. Additionally, experts also theorize that a release of DMT at death may be responsible for those mystical near-death experiences that many of us hear about. So when I thought of this theory, how many plants actually contain DMT, I did come across an article that discussed how some animals, such as rats and other rodents, have DMT in their brain. However, I don't think that the Hills ate rat meat. When I did my research, I was surprised to find that concentrations of DMT can be found naturally in a few animals, but a spectacularly high number of plants. DMT can also be found in the bark of trees, as well as certain grass seeds. The plant that I deemed the most logical and readily accessible to support this theory is Phalaris aruninacea. This plant is easy to obtain. It looks almost identical to common grass, like lawn grass, and it has a very high concentration of DMT, as well as it's easy to grow. So some of you may be wondering why I'm going on this big rant about DMT and why I'm telling you so much about DMT. I promise I am not turning into Joe Rogan. This is not a Joe Rogan podcast. DMT, I think, is just an interesting subject to think about because of the fact that our bodies produce it in the pineal gland, because of the fact that it's found so readily in nature. I think there's some reason why it's found so readily in nature. However, there is a reason besides my own interest in DMT that I'm discussing this. Some people who use DMT reported seeing quote-unquote machine elves or cartoon cats and aliens. One woman even reported being swarmed by alive, wiggling slinky toys. Some individuals reported encounters with seemingly autonomous beings or entities after taking the drug. In a National Post article, psychedelic aficionado Terence McKenna said he felt like he was bursting into a space whose walls were crawling with geometric hallucinations. McKenna said, "What arrests my attention is the fact that this space is inhabited. You break into this space and are immediately swarmed by squeaking, self-transforming elf machines made of light and grammar and sound that come chirping and squealing and tumbling towards you." So many DMT users describe deep interactions with non-human beings, sometimes describing them as clowns or aliens or elves. One person stated, "There was this creature that was dancing around me, and it looked like the thing from The Nightmare Before Christmas." So Jack Skellington is dancing around this woman. Jack Skellington is dancing around this woman, and she says, as it danced around, it would shapeshift and spit out these colors. Since some doctors theorize that DMT is made naturally in the pineal gland and that its presence in the human body is natural, it could explain these similar phenomenon that occur without taking drugs, such as near-death experiences or even so-called alien abductions. So the idea is that your body produces DMT naturally, and your body will produce this DMT naturally, and your brain will fill in the blanks, and it will use that DMT as a hallucinogenic substance to really help your vivid imagination come to life. And I think that could be the case that happened here with Betty and Barney Hill, is that, maybe there was something that happened to them, but the DMT substance came into effect and changed and warped what happened to them, right? It could have been something that happened that was traumatic, or something that happened that really stressed them out, and this DMT substance kicked in and gave them that alien abduction experience. With that being said, up until her death, Betty was adamant that this was a true story. Up until his death, Barney was adamant that this was a true story, that they were abducted. And you can even hear that Barney was not a believer. He had no interest in UFOs. He had no interest in aliens. So, even if something traumatic happened and he filled in these blanks with an alien figure from an Outer Limits episode, why? What happened? Something must have had to happen. A lot of people will listen to this episode, and if they're diehard UFO fans or diehard alien fans, they might be a little bit upset that I'm not completely on board with this abduction. But, we'll explore a few more abductions in this podcast, and, I'm really excited to do some more research and do some more digging into alien abductions, because I think that seeing this phenomenon across the world it's the same idea with spirits in your nightmares and seeing banshees and all these other sorts of things where people share these phenomenon. I think it's really interesting to look at, it could be induced by a drug like ergot, or it could be induced by a drug such as DMT, which is found naturally in our body, which is found in our pineal gland or produced by our pineal gland. So I think that you could theoretically say that any instance where people have a mass quote-unquote hallucination, or they have a shared experience like Betty and Barney do, I don't think Betty and Barney came up with a hoax. I think that this was something that they shared themselves, whether or not it was a dream, whether or not it was influenced by what they watched. I think that it was real to them, and it was a real shared experience. So why is that? Why would they both have that experience, besides saying that Betty was dreaming and shared her dream experience with Barney, and he took that on as himself? But I guess we'll leave it a little open-ended with a few more questions than answers. But I really think that's the case with a lot of UFO or abduction experiences, is that there's some credibility to it, and there's also some, not so credible aspects to it. And I think that a lot of UFO experiences are going to remain unsolved until we are able to come to a point where we can come to an agreement on these things, or where there's some sort of concrete, hard evidence. You could argue that Betty's star map is very concrete evidence, especially since it was viewed from, not from our star system, but from a different star system. I think that alone has a lot of credence to it. But the fact that other individuals such as Miss Fisher were able to recreate that star map and make it, they were able to find out where it was from and find out that it actually did point to a place in the galaxy, or a place in that star system, the Zeta Reticuli system. I think that's a really credible piece of information there. But, I'll leave it up to you to decide what you believe, because I'm not trying to make you a skeptic, and I'm not trying to prove that these exist. I'm just trying to give you a little bit of information to open up your mind, open up that third eye, let that pineal gland flow. Spread that DMT throughout your body, and maybe you too can have an alien abduction story. This episode is produced by Death Hotel Creative, hosted by myself, Dr. Mystery. To view more, visit us at notwhatwesay.com, or check out our Instagram handle at Cabinet of Mystery. Hit up our Twitter at OpenTheCabinet. Please leave us a review if you enjoyed the show, and let us know what topics you'd like to hear in the future. You can hit us up either on the socials or at cabinetofmystery@gmail.com. Thank you again for listening, and please subscribe for more episodes.